Amid the clatter of silverware and the rich scent of gravy, a single sentence sliced me away from the family I built. My daughter-in-law looked down at me and said I did not deserve to sit at the table with them. She mistook my silence for weakness. I did not scream. Instead, I spent the next 12 months quietly flipping the entire board. Now, looking at the empty chair where arrogance used to sit. I know exactly who belongs. My name is Marlene Whitford, and at 62 years old, I have learned that the sharpest knives in a kitchen are not the ones you use to carve the turkey. I stood in the hallway of my son Daniel's house in Oak Ridge Falls, smoothing the front of my grey wool skirt. My hair was pulled back in a tight, sensible bun, the way it had been for 40 years of working commercial kitchens. The air smelled of sage stuffing and expensive candle wax. It was supposed to be a celebration. I walked into the dining room. The table was a masterpiece of domestic theatre. A 20-pound bird sat in the centre, glistening under the warm glow of the chandelier. Crystal wine glasses caught the light, and heavy linen napkins were folded into swans. There were places set for Daniel, for his wife Harper, for her parents, and for my granddaughter Zoe. But my chair was different. It was not tucked under the mahogany rim like the others. It was pushed back, hovering awkwardly near the doorway, as if it were an afterthought attached to the scene by a loose thread. Harper breezed past me carrying a gravy boat, her heels clicking on the hardwood. She paused, looking at my position with a tight, pitying smile that never reached her eyes. "Oh, Marlene," she said, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness she reserved for me. "We figured you would be happier over by the prep area. You know how you get overwhelmed with all the passing of dishes. You are a bit slower these days." A ripple of polite, uncomfortable laughter floated up from her cousins at the far end of the table. My hands tightened on my purse. I was not slow. I could butcher a side of beef faster than Harper could decide on a filter for her Instagram photo. I took a step forward, my hand reaching out to drag the heavy wooden chair closer to the main group, to reclaim the space that should have been mine by right of blood and sacrifice. Harper stopped dead. She turned, and the mask slipped. "Stop," she said. The room went quiet. The clinking of silverware ceased. She looked me up and down, not as a mother-in-law, but as a stain on her perfect tablecloth. "You don't deserve to sit at the table with us." She emphasized the word us like it was a fortress I did not have the password to enter. I looked at Daniel, my son, the boy I had raised on grease burns and late-night accounting. I waited for him to stand up. I waited for him to say that his mother sat at the head of the table, or there would be no dinner at all. "Babe," Daniel mumbled, picking at a loose thread on his napkin, refusing to meet my gaze. "It is just, well, it is a bit crowded. Mum, the kitchen is right there. You can hear us fine." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. I stood there, and I felt the physical sensation of a cord being cut. It was not the umbilical cord. That had been severed decades ago. This was the cord of obligation. I looked at the table. I had paid for the college degree that got Daniel that job. I had secretly paid the down payment on this very house so he would feel like a man. And now, I was being evicted from the life I had subsidized. "Fine," I said. My voice was steady. I turned and walked to the folding card table set up in the corner of the kitchen. It was wobbly and shoved against the wall next to a pile of damp winter coats and a stack of Amazon delivery boxes. I sat down on a cold metal chair. My granddaughter, Zoe, looked over her shoulder at me, her young face twisted in confusion. Mum? Grandma is Zoe started. Turn around. Zoe, Harper commanded, shaking out her napkin. Eat your dinner. I sat alone in the drafty corner. I picked up a piece of dry turkey meat with my plastic fork. I chewed it, and I swallowed it. I did not cry. I did not make a scene. But inside my chest, right behind my ribs, something snapped. It was a clean, dry break. I was done. Through the doorway, I watched them raise their crystal goblets. To family, Daniel toasted, his voice booming with false cheer. I glanced at the old analog watch on my left wrist. It was 5:14 in the afternoon on the fourth Thursday of November. I memorized the position of the hands. I locked that specific minute into my mind. That was not just the time I ate dinner alone next to a muddy boot. That was the time Marlene Whitford died, and something else was born in her place. The metal of the folding chair bit into my spine, cold and unyielding, a stark contrast to the memory of heat that suddenly flooded my mind. Staring at the back of my son's head, I was no longer in his sterile, decorator-perfect dining room. I was back in the grease-stained air of 1985, standing behind the counter of Marlene's Corner Grill. It was a tiny box of a place on the edge of Oak Ridge Falls, smelling perpetually of onions and hard work. I remembered the rhythm of it. My left hand would flip burger patties on the flat-top grill, while my right hand punched buttons on a sticky calculator. Every penny had a name. Every dime was accounted for. In the corner of that cramped diner, there was a laminate table with a wobble in one leg. That was where my life lived. My husband, Jack, would be wiping down counters, and our boys, Daniel and Noah, would be doing their homework at that table. It was scratched and scarred, but it was the center of our universe. We sat there together every night. We were tired. We smelled like fry oil, but we were a unit. Then Jack died. A construction accident took him in a second, leaving me with two terrified boys, a mountain of debt, and a grill that was falling apart. I did not have time to grieve. I had to evolve. I closed the grill to the public and turned it into a catering kitchen because contracts paid better than walk-ins. For 20 years, I lived a life that Daniel only saw the edges of. I woke up at 4 in the morning to bake 300 rolls before the sun came up. I hauled heavy trays into corporate boardrooms and high school cafeterias. I missed soccer games. I missed bedtime stories. I came home only after my sons were asleep, my feet swollen 2 sizes larger than they should have been. I remember one specific Thanksgiving when Daniel was 10. We were catering a massive charity dinner at the Methodist church. I had been on my feet for 14 hours. While the town ate, I sat in the back of the church kitchen, eating a plate of cold ham and potato salad on top of a milk crate. Daniel had found me there. He wrapped his small arms around my neck, smelling like soap and innocence. "Mom," he had whispered, burying his face in my apron. "I hate that you have to eat back here. One day I will make sure you have the best seat. I promise." I held on to that promise like a lifeline. It justified the fatigue, it justified the loneliness, and it drove me to build an empire he never truly understood. I expanded. I bought a central production facility. I secured 10-year contracts with the state school system. Over the decades, I quietly amassed a fortune of over $5 million, but I never flashed it. I wore the same coats. I drove a reliable sedan. I let Daniel believe I was just getting by because I wanted him to build his own character, not rely on mine. But when he met Harper, I broke my own rule. She was sharp, beautiful, and terrifyingly ambitious. When they wanted to buy this house, this sprawling colonial in the best neighborhood, they were denied the loan. I stepped in. I paid off Daniel's student loans. I put down the massive down payment for this house. I remembered Harper taking the check from my hand, her manicured fingers brushing against my calloused ones. "Let's keep this between us." "Marlene," she had said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We don't want Daniel to feel, well, inadequate. Let him think we did this on our own. It is better for his ego." I agreed. I agreed because I loved him. I made myself smaller so he could feel big, slowly, systematically. They pushed me to the edges. 10 years ago. I cooked the entire Thanksgiving meal. 5 years ago. I was asked to just bring the pies. 2 years ago, Harper hired a caterer and asked me to just help with the cleanup. And now, here I was. I looked at the mahogany table in the center of the room. I had paid for that table. I had paid for the walls that held this room together. I had paid for the education that allowed Daniel to sit there and ignore me. The contrast was a physical weight in my chest. I thought of that wobbly laminate table in the grill, the one where we had nothing but loved each other fiercely. And then I looked at this polished, perfect table, where there was everything except a place for me. "Pass the wine, please," I heard Harper say, her voice light and airy. I gripped the edge of the folding table. My son had promised me the best seat. Instead, he had watched his wife exile me to the trash corner, and he had taken another sip of his drink. The grief of the widow from the 80s was gone. In its place was the cold, hard calculation of the businesswoman who had survived her. They thought they were dealing with a helpless old woman. They had forgotten that I was the one who balanced the books, and the ledger was currently very unbalanced. The days following Thanksgiving were not filled with apologies. They were filled with a suffocating, coordinated silence that was broken only by a phone call from Harper 2 weeks later. Her voice was too bright, too loud, the way one speaks to a child or a pet. "Marlene, darling," she chirped. "I have been thinking. You looked so tired at dinner. We really think, well, we think you should consider a more comfortable arrangement. Have you heard of Maple Ridge Residence? It is barely 10 minutes away, and they have full laundry service." I gripped the receiver. Maple Ridge was a warehouse for the dying, a place where people went to stare at walls until they stopped breathing. "I am fine in my house." "Harper," I said, keeping my voice level. "But are you?" Daniel's voice chimed in on the line. He was on speakerphone. "Mom, look, it is just, our house is tight. We don't have room for 3 generations if you ever need more help. Zoe is growing up. She needs her space. We just want you to be safe." I realized then that I was no longer a mother to them. I was a piece of oversized furniture that no longer fit the aesthetic of their lives. The true intention revealed itself a few days later. I was in Daniel's kitchen, dropping off some leftover casseroles, a habit I could not quite break. Harper was on the patio, phone pressed to her ear, a glass of wine in her hand. The sliding door was cracked open just an inch. "Oh, absolutely," Harper was saying, her laugh tinkling like broken glass. "Once we liquidate the old house and the commercial kitchen, we will have more than enough capital. The bistro will be fully funded. We just need to get the assets unlocked. It is a waiting game. But, honestly, she is losing it anyway." My blood ran cold. My catering business. My house. They were not worried about my safety. They were calculating my liquidation value. I drove straight to the bank. I sat across from Susan, a teller who had known me since I was depositing rolls of quarters from the grill. She looked uncomfortable when I asked for my statements. "Marlene," she said softly, sliding a paper across the desk. I probably shouldn't say this, but Daniel was in here last week. He was asking about the protocols for transferring assets if the primary account holder is declared mentally incapacitated. "Is that so?" I asked. My hands were shaking beneath the desk, but my face remained stone. "He mentioned you were having trouble remembering things," Susan added, looking down at her keyboard. "I went to my doctor the next morning. I made him run every cognitive test available. Your blood pressure is a bit high." "Marlene," Dr. Evans said, reviewing the chart, "but your cognitive function. You are sharp as a tack. Why the concern?" "Just checking." I lied. Harper was painting a picture of a senile old woman to the world, preparing the canvas so that when she finally took the brush away, no one would question the theft. The erasure happened in small, stinging increments. I discovered I had been removed from the family group chat because I apparently did not need the notifications bothering me. My spare key to their house no longer worked. Daniel claimed the lock was sticky, but I knew better. They suggested I sell my car because driving in winter was so dangerous at my age. The only crack in their wall was Zoe. My granddaughter snuck over to my house one rainy Tuesday. She stood in my kitchen, her backpack slung over one shoulder, looking torn. "Grandma," she said, picking at her fingernails. "Mum says I shouldn't bother you because you get confused. But can we make cookies?" "Like we used to, I am never too confused to bake with you." "Zoe," I said, handing her an apron. We worked in silence for a while, the smell of vanilla filling the room. It was the only time I felt like a person and not a problem to be solved. But even then, I saw the way she looked at me, searching my face for the signs of decline her mother had promised were there. I was being dismantled, piece by piece. They were stripping away my autonomy, my history, and my dignity. They were clearing the table before I had even finished eating. But as I watched Zoe stir the batter, I realized something important. They thought they were dealing with a fading memory. They did not realize they were poking a woman who had built a fortune out of flour and grit. I was not forgetting anything. I was taking notes. The silence in my own house that night was heavy, pressing against the windows like a physical weight. I sat alone at my kitchen table, the one made of solid oak that Jack and I had bought in 1982 when we finally paid off the mortgage. My finger traced a deep gouge in the wood near the edge. Daniel had made that mark with a steak knife when he was 7 years old, throwing a tantrum because he did not want to eat his peas. I had scolded him then, but tonight, touching that old scar felt like touching a ghost. I had spread the contents of my filing cabinet across the surface. Bank statements, catering contracts, deeds, and a stack of papers Daniel had brought over 3 months ago. He had called them standard updates for my retirement accounts. I put on my reading glasses and began to read. Really read. For the first time. The legal jargon was dense, intentional thickets of words designed to hide the predators lurking inside. Then I found it. Buried on page 12 was a clause granting Daniel full power of attorney not just in death, but in the event of diminished capacity. My hand trembled. Diminished capacity. That was the narrative Harper was spinning. That was why they treated me like a child at dinner. They were not waiting for me to die. They were waiting to declare me incompetent. I picked up my phone, My thumb hovered over Daniel's name. I needed to hear his voice. I needed to hear him tell me I was wrong. I called. It rang once, twice, and then cut to voicemail. A second later, a text message pinged. Mum, super busy right now. Can we talk later? Love you. It was followed by a generic heart emoji. That yellow, pixelated heart felt colder than the winter air outside. I looked at the text, and then I heard Harper's voice echoing in my head. You don't deserve to sit at the table with us. They were right. I did not deserve their table because I was the one who had built the floor they stood on. I pushed the legal papers aside and pulled over a dusty shoebox from the bottom of the stack. Inside were hundreds of letters. Thank you notes from the school board for 20 years of service. A letter from the mayor praising my catering for the town centennial. Invoices paid in full. These were the proofs of my life. I was a businesswoman who had managed budgets of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yet my son saw only a senile old woman holding a checkbook he wanted to inherit early. A wave of hot, blinding rage washed over me. I grabbed the power of attorney document. My hands gripped the paper, ready to tear it into confetti. I wanted to destroy the evidence of his betrayal. I wanted to scream until the windows shattered. But I stopped. My eyes landed on the bottom of the page. There was my signature. Marlene Whitford. It was firm, looped, and decisive. I stared at that ink. That signature was not the mark of a victim. It was the mark of the owner. As long as I was breathing, and as long as I was sane, that signature belonged to me. If I tore it up, I was just an angry mother. If I used it, I was a force of nature. I stood up and walked to the refrigerator. I pulled open the door. The shelves were packed with Tupperware containers of leftover turkey and stuffing I had brought home from the kids' table. I looked at the food. It was excellent food. I had cooked the turkey myself before bringing it over to them. The irony tasted like bile. The best meal of my life was the one where I was told I was unworthy. I slammed the fridge door shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the empty kitchen. I was done being sad. I was done making excuses for the boy who scratched my table. I went back to the living room and picked up the local phone directory. I flipped through the pages until I found the name I had scribbled down a few weeks ago. Tanya Briggs. She had moved into the ranch house next door in October. We had spoken over the fence once. She had mentioned she was a retired paralegal who used to work in estate law and hated bullies. Tanya Briggs. I wrote the number down on the back of an envelope. I did not sleep. I spent the rest of the night organizing. I took every financial record, every deed, every medical report, and the damning power of attorney document, and I packed them into my sturdy canvas catering bag. I placed my phone on top of the pile. I sat in the dark living room, watching the grey light of dawn slowly creep across the floorboards. I was not crying. My eyes were dry and burning. I watched the sun come up over Oak Ridge Falls, illuminating the frost on the grass. I waited for 8 o'clock in the morning. If they thought I did not deserve to sit at their table, then fine. I would build a new table. But this time, I would be the one deciding who sat down, and there would be absolutely no room for greedy children. At 9 o'clock that morning, Tanya Briggs sat at my kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee. She was a sharp woman with short, spiky hair and eyes that missed nothing. I pushed the stack of documents toward her, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Read it," I said, my voice tight. "Tell me, Tanya, Do I still have the rights to my own life? Tanya adjusted her reading glasses and pulled the paperwork closer. She read in silence for 10 minutes. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the wall clock and the rustle of pages turning. Finally, she looked up, and her expression was grim. "It is a classic play. Marlene," she said, tapping a paragraph with a manicured fingernail. "They are setting up a conservatorship framework. See this clause. It defines incapacity very loosely. If they can get 2 doctors to agree you are slipping, Daniel becomes the legal guardian of your estate. He wouldn't just manage your money. He would decide where you live and who you see." I felt the blood drain from my face. He is my son. He is a man with a very ambitious wife and access to your bank routing numbers. Tanya shot back. "You need a shark." "Not the family attorney Daniel goes to for golf tips. You need Amelia Rhodes." 2 hours later. We were sitting in a small, brick-walled office downtown. The sign on the door read, "Rhodes and Lane Legal Group." Amelia Rhodes was a woman in her late 50s, wearing a sharp blazer and an expression that suggested she did not suffer fools. She laid my financial life out on her desk like an anatomy lesson. "You are not just a grandmother. Ms. Whitford," Amelia said, looking at the spreadsheet. "You are a corporation. Between the commercial kitchen, the catering contracts, and your savings, you are sitting on liquid assets of over $5 million. And right now, Daniel is listed as a joint signer on your primary operating account. He can drain that by 5 o'clock today if he wants to." He told me it was for bill payment convenience. I whispered. "It is convenient." "All right," Amelia said dryly. "For him, here is the plan. We are going to revoke his power of attorney immediately. Then, we are going to move your assets into a revocable living trust. You will be the sole trustee. Daniel gets nothing unless you say so." Tanya, who had been quiet, leaned forward. "Marlene, there is something else. I didn't want to say it until I was sure. But I saw Harper at the salon last week. She was loud. She was telling her stylist that they were about to close on a location for a new bistro. She said they were funding it with a family investment that was coming available in the spring." My hands clenched into fists on my lap. Spring. That was when they planned to sell my house. They were not just pushing me out. They were actively spending the money they planned to steal. "They want my money," I said, a cold resolve settling over me. "Fine. They won't touch a cent of it. Amelia, I want to structure the trust differently. I want to create a foundation." Amelia raised an eyebrow. "A foundation, the Second Serving Foundation," I said, the name coming to me as if it had always been there. "I want to fund startup grants for women over 50. Women who want to start food trucks, catering businesses, bakeries. Women who have been told they are too old or too useless." Amelia smiled, and it was a genuine, dangerous smile. "Now that is a legacy. We can draft that. But Marlene, you have to listen to me very carefully. This only works if they don't see it coming. You have to play the part. Be the confused old lady. Let them think their plan is working until the ink is dry on the new accounts." "I can do that," I said. "Good," Amelia said, sliding a fresh stack of papers toward me. "Sign here to revoke the power of attorney. Sign here to open the new corporate accounts at a different bank. And sign here to transfer the deed of your house into the trust." I picked up the pen. It felt heavy, like a weapon. I signed my name, Marlene Whitford, over and over again. With every loop of the ink, I was severing a tie with the son who had betrayed me. I was moving millions of dollars out of his reach and into a fortress he could not breach. "It is done," Amelia said, stamping the final document with a heavy thud. "As of right now, Daniel has no authority. But remember, silence." "Oh, I will be quiet," I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. "I will be very quiet, right up until I am not." I began to train for my new life the same way I used to prep for a 500-person wedding service, with methodical, brutal consistency. Every morning at 6 o'clock, I laced up a pair of new running shoes. I did not run, but I walked with a pace that made my lungs burn, marching through the frosty streets of Oak Ridge Falls until my phone app chirped that I had hit 10,000 steps. I was not doing this to look younger. I was doing it because the war I was about to start would require stamina, and I refused to be the fragile old woman Harper described to her friends. Back inside my house, I started the purge. I went room by room, packing away the porcelain figurines and the dust-gathering knickknacks into sturdy cardboard boxes. I sent the sentimental items to a climate-controlled storage unit and donated the rest. The house began to look sparse, almost echoey. To an outsider, it might have looked like I was preparing to die. In reality, I was preparing to be mobile. I was stripping the weight off my life so that when I moved, I would move fast. On Tuesdays, I drove to the community center for a free cooking class. It was supposed to be a hobby, something to keep the elderly busy. But within 20 minutes of the first session, I found myself gently correcting the instructor on the proper way to emulsify a vinaigrette. That was where I met them. There was Brenda, a widow whose son had mortgaged her house out from under her to pay his gambling debts. There was Sarah, a woman who had run a school cafeteria for 30 years, only to be fired 2 years before her pension vested. And there was Maria, who had owned a bakery until her children convinced her to sell it and put the money into a shared family trust that she could no longer access. I invited them to my house on a Thursday evening. I did not serve tea and cookies. I turned my kitchen into a production line. We roasted 3 chickens, glazed 5 pounds of carrots, and whipped potatoes until they were like clouds. "My son says I am too old to handle a business," Brenda said, her hands shaking slightly as she piped icing onto a tray of cupcakes. "He says I should just rest. Rest is for the dead." "Brenda?" I said, looking her in the eye. "Do you want to rest? Or do you want to bake?" "I want to bake," she whispered. "Then we are going to bake," I stated firmly. The front door opened, and Zoe walked in, shaking rain off her umbrella. She froze in the hallway. She was used to seeing me alone, watching game shows in a dim living room. Instead, she found her grandmother standing at the head of the kitchen island, surrounded by 3 other women. Blueprints for a commercial kitchen spread out amidst the flour and butter. The air smelled of rosemary and ambition. Grandma Zoe asked, stepping into the light. What is going on?" "We are working." "Zoe," I said, wiping my hands on my apron. I pointed to the blueprints. "This is the layout for the Second Serving Foundation. It is a grant program and a shared workspace for women who need a second act." Zoe walked over to the table. She looked at the sketches, then at Brenda, who was glowing with a sense of purpose I guessed she hadn't felt in years. Zoe looked back at me, her eyes wide. "You are building a business?" Zoe asked. "But Mom said you were retiring. Your mother says a lot of things." I replied calmly. "I am renting the old warehouse down by the river. We submitted the permits this morning. We are going to have 5 food trucks running out of there by summer. Zoe looked at the plans again. For the first time, she was not looking at me with pity or mild affection. She was looking at me with respect. She sat down on a stool. Can I help taste test? She asked shyly. Grab a fork, I said. That night, after everyone had left and the kitchen was spotless, I stood in front of the hallway mirror. The face staring back was lined. My hair was still grey. My hands were veined. But the eyes were different. The cloudy film of resignation was gone. I was no longer the woman waiting for an invitation to sit at a table where I wasn't wanted. I was the carpenter, and I was building a banquet hall. I turned off the light, ready for the next day. I had a lot of work to do. The intervention arrived on a Tuesday evening, masked as a casual family dinner. Daniel and Harper sat across from me in my living room, their faces arranged in matching expressions of concern that looked rehearsed. Harper placed a folder on the coffee table. Marlene. We need to be realistic, Harper began, her voice dropping to a whisper. We have been looking at the maintenance costs for this house. It is just too much for you alone. We think it is time to help you transition to a life of leisure. We will sell the house, handle the stress of the market, and keep a nest egg for you to live comfortably at Maple Ridge. I looked at them, blinking slowly behind my glasses. But I have enough savings, don't I? Harper sighed and opened the folder. She slid a spreadsheet toward me. It was a work of fiction. The columns showed inflated heating bills, imaginary repair costs, and a projected savings account that was nearly empty. See, Daniel said, pointing at a red number at the bottom. You are bleeding money. Mum, if we don't act now, you won't have anything left for your care. I adjusted my glasses, pretending to squint at the numbers. I knew exactly how much was in my accounts down to the last cent. I knew because Amelia Rhodes had shown me the real balance sheet that morning. She had also shown me a printed email Harper had sent to a real estate broker named Stevens. The subject line had been Prime Location Listing, Spring Target. The body of the email read, The deed is in my mother-in-law's name, but we are moving her to a facility shortly. Paperwork is in progress. Be ready to list by March for maximum value. I suppose you are right, I stammered, looking down at my hands. I don't want to be a burden. You are never a burden, Daniel said quickly, though he checked his watch immediately after saying it. We just want you safe. 2 days later, they drove me to Maple Ridge. The lobby smelled of antiseptic masked by lavender air freshener. A young woman named Jessica gave us the tour, smiling too widely. And this would be the memory care wing, Jessica said, gesturing to a locked door. Mr. Whitford mentioned that was the priority given the decline. I felt a cold spike in my chest. I looked at Daniel. He was studying the linoleum floor. It is just a precaution. Mom, he mumbled. We sat in the administrative office to sign some preliminary paperwork. This was the moment Amelia had prepared me for. Daniel slid a stack of forms toward me. This just allows them to access your medical records. Mom, Daniel said, tapping the paper. Standard stuff. I reached into my purse. Oh, I brought the one Dr. Evans gave me. He said this one covers everything. I pulled out the document Amelia had drafted. It looked identical to the standard medical release forms, dense with legal text, but the clauses were entirely different. It was a formal revocation of all prior powers of attorney and a declaration of independent capacity. "Here," I said, my hand trembling just enough to sell the performance. Daniel didn't even read it. He saw the header, saw my signature, and snatched it up, eager to file it away. He thought he was taking control of my medical life. He had actually just signed a receipt acknowledging he had no power over me at all. That weekend, Harper hosted a victory dinner at their house. They were celebrating, though they didn't say it aloud. They were celebrating the house they thought they were selling and the money they thought they were spending. I sat at the end of the table, sipping iced tea. Harper was glowing. "It is going to be a great year," she said, raising her glass. "New beginnings for everyone." Zoe was sitting on the stairs, just out of sight, playing on her phone. I watched her pause. From the kitchen, Harper's voice drifted out as she went to refill the wine. She was on the phone with her friend. "Oh, God, no. She won't be living with us." Harper laughed. "Once we get Marlene settled and the house sold, we have to deal with my mother. Ruth is becoming such a heavy burden. But one thing at a time. The Whitford assets first. Then we tackle the next problem." I saw Zoe lower her phone. She looked at the kitchen door, then at me. Her face went pale. The realization was hitting her hard. She was watching a production line where her grandmothers were being processed like livestock. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Tanya. They tested the waters. $50 withdrawn from the joint account at an ATM an hour ago, just small enough to go unnoticed. "They are checking if you are watching." I looked at Daniel, who was laughing at something on the television. He was stealing $50 from his mother while planning to sell her home out from under her. "Marlene, are you okay?" Harper asked, returning to the room with the wine bottle. "You look a million miles away." "Oh, just thinking," I said softly. I was thinking about tomorrow morning. I was thinking about the appointment I had scheduled with the notary public at 9 o'clock sharp. I was thinking about the Second Serving Foundation, which was now the legal beneficiary of my entire estate. I watched them toast to their future, completely unaware that I had already cancelled it. They thought I was sitting at their table, grateful for the scraps. They didn't know I had already left the room. The conference room at Weston & Cole LLP smelled of lemon polish and old money. It was the kind of room designed to make you feel small, with its heavy oak table and leather chairs that swallowed you whole. I walked in, wearing my simple navy Sunday dress, clutching my purse with both hands. Tanya walked a step behind me, silent and watchful, like a bodyguard in a floral blouse. Daniel and Harper were already seated. They looked like the perfect picture of concerned potential heirs. Daniel stood up, buttoning his jacket with an air of importance that he had not earned. "Mom," he said, his voice smooth. "I am glad you brought a friend. This won't take long. Mr. Weston just needs to review the current standing of the estate so we can get everything ready for the transition to Maple Ridge. It is just a formality, really, to keep you safe." I sat down. I looked at the file folder in front of Mr. Weston, the family lawyer who had handled my husband's death benefits 30 years ago. He looked tired. "It is good to see you." "Marlene?" Mr. Weston said, opening the folder. "Daniel tells me we are looking at a consolidation of assets due to health concerns." "Exactly," Harper interjected, leaning forward. She placed a manicured hand on the table. "Marlene has been, well, she has been a bit slow lately. Forgetting things." We just want to make sure the family legacy is protected before she, you know, declines further. I watched her face. She was practically drooling over the paperwork. She knew exactly what was in that old will, the house, the catering business, the accounts, all left to Daniel. Mr. Weston cleared his throat. Very well. Under the terms of the last will and testament, dated 2005, the primary beneficiary is the heavy wooden door swung open. Mr. Weston's secretary, a young woman with a terrified expression, rushed in, holding a crisp stack of papers. I am so sorry to interrupt. Sir, she said, breathless. But we just received a courier package from Rhodes and Lane Legal Group. It is marked urgent. Priority filing. Mr. Weston frowned, taking the papers. The room went silent. I watched Daniel's eyes flick from the papers to me. He looked confused. Harper looked annoyed. Mr. Weston read the first page. Then he read the second. His face drained of colour. He looked up at me over his reading glasses, and for the first time in 30 years, he looked at me with fear. Marlene? He asked softly. Is this correct? What is it? Daniel demanded, his voice rising. What is going on, Mr. Weston closed the old folder and placed the new stack on top of it. Mr. Whitford, I am afraid the document we were about to review is no longer valid. In fact, it has been legally voided as of 3 days ago. Mrs. Whitford has established a new revocable living trust. A trust, Harper scoffed. She doesn't even know what a trust is. Who is the trustee, Daniel? Right, no, Mr. Weston said, his voice tight. The sole trustee is Marlene Whitford, and the primary beneficiary of the estate is not an individual. It is a non-profit entity listed as the Second Serving Foundation. The silence that followed was violent. Daniel stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. What he whispered, the what foundation? It is a charitable organization. Mr. Weston continued, reading from the page, dedicated to funding businesses for women over the age of 50. Upon Mrs. Whitford's passing, control of the trust does not pass to family. It passes to a board of directors comprised of beneficiaries of the program. Harper stood up so fast, her chair tipped over backward with a crash. Her face was twisted into a mask of ugly, naked greed. She pointed a shaking finger at Tanya. You, she screamed. You did this. You poisoned her. This is elder abuse. She is incompetent. She doesn't know what she is signing. Daniel found his voice. Mum, you can't do this. You are not well. We have the doctor's notes. I reached into my bag. I pulled out the envelope Dr. Evans and the court-appointed psychiatrist had given me. I slid it across the polished table. I have 2 separate evaluations, dated yesterday and the day before, I said, my voice steady and clear. Both certify that I am of sound mind, excellent memory, and full legal capacity. If you try to challenge this, Daniel, it will be public record that you tried to declare a sane woman incompetent to steal her money. We are calling the police, Harper hissed, grabbing her phone. This is fraud. The secretary, who was still standing by the door, cleared her throat again. She looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Whitford. The courier also included a note from the bank regarding the joint account. Daniel went pale. There was a flagged transaction, the secretary murmured, looking at the floor. A test withdrawal of $50, followed by an attempt to access the safety deposit box records. The bank has flagged it as potential financial exploitation by a secondary signer. If a police report is filed regarding the estate, the bank is required to submit those logs to the fraud unit. The room froze. The threat hung in the air like smoke. If they called the police on me, they would be handing over the evidence of their own crimes. Daniel sank back into his chair. He looked at me, his eyes wet with shock and a sudden, terrifying realization that he had lost. "Mom," he choked out. "How could you? We are family. The table. The family table." I stood up. I smoothed my dress. I looked at the son I had carried, the son I had raised, the son who had watched his wife treat me like garbage and done nothing. "Daniel," I said, looking him dead in the eye, "if you think I don't deserve to sit at your table, then I certainly don't think you deserve to sit at mine. My foundation is my new table, and I made sure there is absolutely no room at it for greedy children." I turned to Tanya. "Come on. We have a kitchen to run." We walked out of the office, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of the future they thought they were entitled to. I did not look back. Daniel caught up to me in the parking lot, his breath forming clouds in the biting November air. He did not look like the confident heir who had walked into the meeting. He looked like the little boy who had broken a window playing baseball, desperate to hide the evidence. He grabbed my arm, not roughly, but with a frantic, clinging grip. "Mom, wait." He pleaded. "You are not really doing this. Think about the tree house I built with Dad. Think about the summers at the lake. You can't just trade us in for a tax write-off." I stopped and looked at his hand on my coat. It was the same hand that had signed the checks to the nursing home deposit. "I am not trading you in." "Daniel," I said, my voice soft but unyielding, "I am just taking the price tag off our relationship. I love you. I will always love you. But I am done paying you to love me back." "It is not about the money," he shouted, tears welling in his eyes. "It is only about the money." I corrected him. "If it wasn't, you would be asking me to dinner, not asking me to cancel a trust." I pulled my arm free and got into Tanya's car. As we drove away, I saw him standing there, a man shrinking in the rearview mirror. The fallout was immediate and ugly. Harper banned Zoe from coming to my house, telling the poor girl that her grandmother had mental issues and had destroyed the family future out of spite. But blood is thicker than lies. Zoe called me 3 nights later, whispering from inside her closet. "Grandma," she choked out, her voice trembling. Mum says you hate us. I don't know what to do. I feel like I have to choose, and I hate it. Listen to me." "Zoe," I said, pressing the phone to my ear. "You do not have to choose sides. This is a war between adults who forgot how to be kind. You don't owe me your loyalty, and you don't owe your parents your silence. You just owe yourself the work of becoming a decent person." I hung up and went back to work. We were transforming the old warehouse. The smell of fresh paint and industrial sanitizer replaced the scent of betrayal. We hung a sign above the loading dock second serving kitchen. It was not just a workspace. It was a sanctuary. Brenda, Sarah, and Maria were there every day, scrubbing floors and testing ovens. We were a family of cast-offs, and we were stronger for it. Then came the call that changed the battlefield completely. My phone rang late one evening. The number was blocked. When I answered, I heard a ragged, terrified breathing. "Marlene," a voice whispered. "It is Ruth, Harper's mother." I froze. Ruth was a quiet, mouse-like woman whom Harper usually kept in the background at parties to watch the coats. "Ruth," I asked, "what is wrong? She is doing it to me." Ruth sobbed. I heard them. "Harper found a facility in Ohio. It is state-funded. It is cheap. She said she can't afford to keep me around now that your house isn't being sold. She is shipping me out next week." "Marlene, I don't want to go. Please." My blood boiled. Harper was not just greedy. She was a predator who consumed the weak to feed her lifestyle. "Pack a bag." "Ruth," I commanded, "I am coming to get you." I moved Ruth into the spare bedroom that Harper had claimed was too expensive to maintain. The next day, I took her to the kitchen. When Zoe skipped school to sneak over to the warehouse, expecting to see a lonely old woman, she walked into a bustling hive of activity. She saw me standing by the commercial mixer. And right next to me, wearing a flour-dusted apron and laughing for the first time in years, was her other grandmother, Ruth. Zoe stopped dead in her tracks. She looked at Ruth, then at me. "Grandma?" Zoe asked, her voice small. Mum said you were sick. She said you needed specialized care." "Your mother lied," Ruth said, her voice shaking but firm. "Marlene gave me a job. And a room." Zoe looked at me. The narrative Harper had spun that I was the villain and Ruth was the burden shattered right there on the concrete floor. Zoe didn't say a word. She just walked over, picked up a towel, and started drying the dishes Ruth was washing. As Thanksgiving approached, the tension in Oak Ridge Falls was thick enough to cut with a knife. Daniel and Harper sent out invitations for a gala-style dinner, a desperate attempt to prove to the town that they were still the golden couple, still solvent, still in control. They ordered expensive caterers and bought new furniture on credit. Meanwhile, at the second-serving kitchen, we were preparing a different kind of meal. We were roasting 20 turkeys. We were mashing 50 pounds of potatoes. We were setting up long communal tables that stretched from the loading dock to the parking lot. We didn't send out invitations. We just put up a flyer that read, "If you have ever been told there is no room for you at the table, come sit at ours." I stood in the center of the kitchen, watching Ruth and Brenda argue playfully over the sage stuffing. I was tired. My feet ached, and my bank account was locked in a trust. But I had never felt richer. The line was drawn. On one side of town, a table set for show. On our side, a table set for survival. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that when the sun went down on Thanksgiving Day, only one of those tables would matter. The warehouse smelled of roasted sage, caramelized onions, and the sweet, yeasty scent of rising dough. It was exactly 365 days since I had eaten a dry piece of turkey next to a pile of winter coats. Today, I stood at the head of a 20-foot serving line in the second-serving kitchen. The sign taped to the steel front door was handwritten in thick black marker table, open for anyone who has ever been told they are unworthy. Across town, I knew exactly what was happening. Zoe told me later that the crystal glasses were polished to a shine and the turkey was perfectly golden, but the silence was heavy enough to crush a lung. There was one empty chair at their table. It was the spot where they had placed me the year before. This time, no one had tried to invite me. They just left the gap there, a hollow space that screamed of their failure. According to Zoe, The breaking point did not happen with a shout. It happened with a whisper. She looked at her parents, then at the empty chair, and then at her own hands. "I can't do this," she had said, pushing her plate away. "We are pretending we are a perfect family, but we treated Grandma like trash, and we threw Grandma Ruth away like she was expired milk. I am not hungry." She had stood up, grabbed her coat, and walked out the door while Harper screamed at her to sit back down. Back in my kitchen, I was busy scooping mashed potatoes onto paper plates. The room was loud with laughter. Brenda was flirting with the delivery driver, and Ruth was teaching a young single mother how to properly carve a bird. I did not hear the door open. I only felt the shift in the air, a sudden draft of cold wind that cut through the warmth. I looked up. Zoe stood in the doorway. She was still wearing her expensive velvet dress, but her hair was windblown, and she was breathing hard as if she had run the whole 3 miles. She looked at the line of women in hairnets. She looked at the mismatched chairs. And then she looked at me. The room went quiet. I held my serving spoon, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Zoe?" I asked softly. She took a step forward, her eyes bright with tears. "Grandma, if they say you are not worthy of their table, can I please sit at yours?" I looked at the girl who was the only piece of my old life worth saving. I did not hug her. Not yet. I reached under the counter and pulled out a clean white apron. I held it out to her. "At this table. Zoe, nobody just sits," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "At this table, we serve. Are you ready to work?" Zoe didn't hesitate. She grabbed the apron and tied it over her velvet dress. "I am ready." She took the spot next to me. We worked in rhythm, side by side, for 20 minutes before the heavy metal doors banged open again. Daniel and Harper stood there. Daniel looked frantic, his tie crooked. Harper looked like she had stepped in something foul. Daniel spotted Zoe immediately. He started to rush forward, but he stopped when he saw her laughing as she spooned cranberry sauce onto a homeless man's plate. He looked at the scene, the warmth, the noise, the genuine joy, and he looked paralyzed. He was standing on the threshold of a world he did not understand. Harper, however, did not lack for words. She marched up to the serving line, her nose wrinkled in disgust. "Zoe, get your coat," Harper snapped. "We are leaving. Now." Zoe didn't move. She didn't even look up. "Did you hear me?" Harper hissed, her voice rising to a screech that silenced the room. She swept her hand toward the women sitting at the long tables. "You do not belong here. You are a Whitford. You don't deserve to sit at this table with you people." The echo of her words hung in the air. It was the same venom she had spit at me a year ago. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked around the counter. I stood between my granddaughter and her mother. "You are right, Harper," I said, my voice calm and deadly cold. "She doesn't deserve to sit at a table where kindness is viewed as a weakness. And neither do I. That is why we are here, and that is why you are leaving." I pointed to the door. "Get out of my kitchen," I said. Daniel looked at me. For a second, I saw the ghost of the boy who used to promise me the best seat in the house. He looked at his wife, then at his daughter, and finally at the table full of women who had rebuilt their lives from the wreckage people like him had left behind. He took a step toward us, then stopped. He looked at the luxury car waiting outside, and he looked at the warmth inside. He couldn't cross the line. He lowered his head, turned around, and walked out into the cold. Harper followed him, her heels clicking angrily on the concrete. I locked the door behind them. I turned back to the room. Zoe was smiling. Ruth was raising a glass of apple cider. I walked over and took my seat at the head of the long, mismatched table. I looked at the faces around me. I had lost a son, but I had found a family. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone, I said. We passed the potatoes. We passed the turkey. And as I took the first bite, I knew one thing for certain. The table they said I wasn't good enough for was just a piece of furniture. The table I had built tonight was a home. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you guys are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's chat. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button. Subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary for more stories like this. And don't forget to hit that hype button so we can get this story out to everyone who needs to hear it.